Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our afternoon for our Texas Demographic Conference. Glad to have you here, those in person and those joining us online. This afternoon, we are hosting a plenary session here that we're doing, again, both live stream and in person. We're discussing a very important topic that a lot of us have been asking about in our different workshops when we think of economic development and looking at the growth across the state. In case you didn't know, but I'm sure our speakers are going to address this, Texas will be gaining the most federal funding more than any other state to help expand broadband, and as an initiative at the federal level. So we think this is a very important and pertinent topic, especially going along with our theme of bridging gaps and building futures. We know that addressing the digital divide is instrumental in that effort. So I'm going to introduce our speakers for this afternoon, and then they'll get started. We do have Andrea Pacheco could not join us, but we do have a wonderful staff member and part of her team joining us here today. So I'm going to introduce both of our speakers now. So we have Cindy Fisher will be speaking. Cindy is the Digital Opportunity Program Supervisor at the Texas Broadband Office, which will help expand access to funding and resources to support Texans access to affordable devices, connections, digital skills, and accessible services. Before joining the Broadband Development Office, she worked at the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, building the capacity of rural libraries across the state through training and consultation on a variety of technology programs, including the You Can Do IT Library Technology Academy and the Texas Digital Navigators. She has also built partnerships with state and national partners in nonprofits and philanthropy, and has served as a great reviewer for state and federal grant programs. So really excited to have Cindy here. And she will be followed by Lauren Weber. Lauren Weber is the Digital Opportunity Outreach Coordinator for the state's broadband office under the Texas Comptroller's Office. The Broadband Development Office is focused on closing the digital divide by expanding these. I think I'm probably repeating what I just said, so y'all kind of have the same bio, but both of these staff members for BDO are doing they have a huge initiative to get started on and trying to get outreach to all parts of Texas. But through Lauren's work, she saw the systemic inequities of the digital divide on her students when she was a teacher, most recently as a public school teacher at Austin ISD. Lauren was raised in Hollywood, Florida, and received her bachelor's degree from Florida Gulf Coast University. And we're just pleased to have you both here today with us. So I'll have Cindy come on up and get started. And please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Can you all hear me okay? Okay, wonderful. Thank you. First, I want to say thank you all for coming here today to listen to us talk about broadband. And huge thanks to Monica for inviting us. This has just been a wonderful way to make connections with you all and with people that are also very important in helping us with this massive initiative. I also it's just very exciting to be in a room with other people that are in alignment on similar initiatives. Okay, so I just want to also acknowledge that earlier this morning, Dr. Potter gave a presentation that really underlined how there are more and more Texans that are moving here. There are more and more people moving to become Texans, and that requires more and more infrastructure. So, as Monica alluded to, broadband is part of that infrastructure. As we'll detail in our presentation, Texas is receiving the largest allotment of funds for broadband infrastructure, and ensuring that people can use that infrastructure is the wraparound support that they'll need to use that. So Before as a librarian, I taught digital literacy classes and also worked at UT Austin with students doing information literacy. And I can't not do a somewhat interactive presentation. So I hope that you'll indulge me in a little bit of an activity about our experiences with internet access. So first, I just want to gauge the kind of the group. For those of you, and it's okay if you don't know some of this terminology, we are going to get into it, but I want to talk a little bit about technology type. So those of you who subscribe to the internet via satellite technology, can you raise your hand? Okay. Yeah, it's okay. It's okay if you don't know. That's one of the options. Can you raise your hand if you subscribe through fiber technology? Oh, okay. All right, great. Raise your hand if you're not sure and you just tether your phone or your tablet. Okay, see, there's always a few. I love that. Okay, great. So next question, the number of providers. Raise your hand if you have just one internet service provider that you subscribe to for home service. Okay. Raise your hand if you have one or two available providers in your area. And maybe I should rephrase that. One of you have multiple options to subscribe. Yeah, I know, sorry, rephrase. Okay. Raise your hand if you have 4 or more internet service providers. Okay. And raise your hand if you have no idea how many you have. And then the one question I forgot to put on here is raise your hand if you don't have any people. Okay. That actually is an option for some people in Texas. We're going to move on, though. Turn to the person sitting next to you and tell them how much you pay for internet service at your house. And then, if you can, tell them how fast that speed is. All right, we're going to come back. I'm going to do my mom as a former kindergarten teacher was the quiet coyote. All right, I hope you learned some things. Who thinks they pay the lowest amount of money for the highest speed? You want to call it out? I know we're on a live stream, but I'll repeat it. Who thinks they pay the lowest amount of money for the highest speed? Lonnie says this person over here.
Yes. I mean, I Google fiber.
Okay.
$70.
$70 a month for a gig. Oh, I got someone that beats that. For a gigabit.
I have fiber.
Okay, so the speed matters, so that's important to know too. Okay, cool. Yes, sir.
45 for a gig.
Whoa, all right, we're learning. Well, there are those too, that's right. Okay, who thinks they pay the highest amount for the lowest speed? Anyone talk about that? The lowest speed.
What about if we think we pay too much for what we get?
Oh, that is a whole nother conversation. The question was, what if we think we're paying too much for what you get? That's what you said, right? Yeah. All right. So the data will show that there are many people that pay a lot of money for not very much speed. So I think your comment is right on. Oh, wait, and the final question in terms of cost, which we talk about in terms of affordability, is raise your hand if you know someone that subscribed to the Affordable Connectivity Program. Okay, the Affordable Connectivity Program was a federal subsidy to help people pay for their internet costs. All right, finally, digital skills. Raise your hand if you've been that person in your family that is on the providing end of providing technical support to other people. Okay, let's flip it. Raise your hand if you've been on the receiving end of technical support. Okay, yeah, sometimes it goes both ways, right? Everyone's learning. Okay, great. Thank you so much for playing along. These are just few of the data points that the Broadband Development Office has been both reviewing and collecting to help us understand the challenges and opportunities ahead of us in access, adoption, and digital skills. Let's see. Okay, cool. All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to some of the foundational broadband concepts. I think we've already got a little bit of knowledge in the room now, but just to ensure that we are talking through that. So to measure the speed of broadband, that is how quickly information is sent and received over a device and a connection, we use something called megabits per second, or MGPS. It's abbreviated as MGPS. Generally, broadband is used interchangeably. That term is used interchangeably with high-speed internet access. And recently, the Federal Communications Commission changed the definition of high-speed broadband from 25 megabits download speed to 3 megabits upload speed to the much higher and extremely important 100 megabits download speed to 20 megabits upload speed. And so just as an example, 25.3 speed forces a student to keep their camera off on a Zoom class and stay muted because it's just too much of a demand on speed. And 100 and over 20 allows a student to fully participate in that class. As we know, we've all lived it, 2024, access to high-speed broadband really impacts a wide scope of our lives. And these are some of the needs that we have in terms of the benefits of access. So in particular, with healthcare, without broadband, you can't book a telehealth appointment, or location data sharing for emergency services is really, really challenging. So high-speed broadband access really increases public safety. In addition, telework is also impacted by the ability of broadband access. If you think about our rural residents, telework enables young people looking for career opportunities to work remotely from home while boosting their local economy. It also obviously impacts our economic development. And on top of that, as we all have probably experienced too, telework helps us stay out of our cars and enables economic sustainability, environmental sustainability. So here's a brief look at the digital divide in Texas. Nationally, there are 42 million people across the country that do not have broadband access. In Texas, it's about 3 million households. When we talk about the digital divide, we talk about these 5 areas here: the lack of infrastructure, the digital literacy skills, affordability, access to devices, and technical support, which may sound familiar from our quiz earlier this morning. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about mapping because I know that I'm in a team and an audience full of self-described, what I've heard is data nerds. I'm ready. I think I'm ready for some questions later, but we'll see. So what you see here on the screen is a screenshot of Texas from the Digital Equity Act Population Viewer, a map provided by the National Telecommunications Information for states and for state broadband offices that incorporates data from the American Community Survey estimates, the National Center for Education Statistics, FCC reports, and another NTIA Internet Use Survey. This kind of aggregated data and mapping was so helpful for us as we were developing our understanding of our grant program, to design a grant program and understanding need across the state. It helped us understand specific needs of particular covered populations that Lauren will address in a little bit. And it helped us to align federal data with what we see here in Texas. But ahead of discussing some of those funding programs and initiatives, I also just really want to take a second to address some of the challenges that we and other state broadband offices face with regards to data collection. Our other BDO programs use federal data sources like the FCC National Broadband Map to help inform our funding. The quest for data accuracy is a real one. I'm sure that you guys can all understand and also manage. And these are the specific challenges that we've encountered. First, a lot of the data that we get may be inaccurate to begin with. The reporting requirements for some of our funding programs were actually established in the 1990s, and we're talking about technology here. So the evolution of that revised technology has been slower than the actual evolutions. The adoption of that technology has been faster than the evolution, and also of the standards. So as providers, or those internet service providers, are reporting, the social expectations are higher than what is federally and sometimes state required. It also means some locations are going to be reported as having higher speeds because a network was updated, but a few locations were left off. This goes deeper when we look at our initial Texas broadband map, where we had some of the data was actually adding empty fields. And that was supposed to be service of locations. And so when we asked our providers to give us data, they were not able to provide us actual data, accurate data, because we didn't provide them an accurate map. And so that's just a challenge. We acknowledge, we move forward, we try to keep iterating and do the best we can. A second challenge is that in terms of at the federal level, there are multiple projects, multiple funding programs for broadband infrastructure that have different deadlines and different requirements. So some federal programs may be in the midst of awarding grants to certain locations, while others are just starting. And so all of a sudden, if you've accepted funding to begin infrastructure build out in one area, you're no longer eligible in another area. But how do we make sure that each area, that the broadband office knows who's now eligible? The reporting goes to different federal agencies. So that's fun and great. And then finally, one that is also a huge challenge is the lack of participation or preemptive lack of participation due to the lack of capacity from our smaller communities. A lot of the ways that this data gets corrected is by asking our communities to tell us what is their personal experience. But if a requirement is difficult for a local community to be able to pass, it makes it difficult for them to tell us what's happening on the ground. And so that we understand that without the human perspective here, that they need to have funding and capacity in order to help us correct some of this mapping. So those are just some challenges that we recognize, and we're all learning, as you'll learn very soon. We're a really young office, so the learning curve has been somewhat steep, but we've also been really well supported by the community and by the comptroller. So we were created in 2021 through House Bill 5, and we are now housed in the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. Comptroller Hagar has given us the full resources of the agency, so we're grateful to receive the support from the communications department, our legal department, and our procurement department. The comptroller also chairs our board. The BDO is tasked with three main initiatives: to create a state broadband plan, which we did, to create a broadband development map, which is done but also being improved, and finally, to implement broadband development programs to administer expansion grants. That is ongoing and in process, probably for the next number of years. Okay, so let me just kind of jump into some of those funding programs. And as I talk through these, what I always think about when I'm thinking about these funding programs is all of the reporting requirements that come with getting this funding and the data that's going to be reported back from these funding programs. So the first one is the ARPA, the American Rescue Plan Act. That comes from the Treasury's Coronavirus Capital Project Fund. Texas was awarded $500.5 million. And when Broadband Office was figuring out how to actually use these funds and expend them to make sure they're having maximum impact, we reached out to some other state agencies to ask to help us to submit a proposal to the Treasury Department. Okay, this is a slide that maybe gives you some understanding of where those funds are going, but just to read them out. So we're partnering with at least three state agencies. The first is the Texas State Library and Archives Commission, as well as the Texas Department of Agriculture to help modernize both libraries and hospitals. Additionally, we're also partnering with the Texas Department of Transportation, which will help provide Wi-Fi connections at rest stops outside of El Paso. Is anyone from El Paso outside? Has anyone traveled west? Okay. All right, okay, good. Well, I'm just going to say that a drive from El Paso anywhere is a very long drive, as we know. And there are long stretches of road where there's very little to no connectivity. So enabling hotspots or connectivity at rest stops can also increase that safety out there. And while there, I'm sure the kindness of strangers will also assist, it's nice to have a backup of internet connection. The majority of these funds actually went directly to the BDO to institute a last mile connectivity program. And for those of you that aren't familiar with some of that terminology, the connection from a main line to a home is called the last mile. The first mile is from the data center itself. The middle mile is the highway essentially to your neighborhood, and the last mile is your driveway. So the goal is of these funds is to focus on the last mile builds and ensure that we are connecting homes and businesses to the internet. The BOOT program is that last mile program. So we made $120 million available to BOOT. I hope you appreciate the acronym as much as we do. The people that were eligible, the organizations that were eligible for BOOT were political subdivisions and broadband service providers, or ISPs. And you'll start to see that there's requirements on those speeds. So for this project, they had to have 100 over 100, or 100 symmetrical megabits per second. And they also needed to provide, anyone that accepted these funds needed to provide a low-cost option. All right, so the next one is the very, very big one with the hugest allocation that Monica alluded to. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is a truly historic amount of funding that's coming to the state, otherwise known as IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. It brings $42 billion to all 50 states and territories. And the funds come from these two programs. The first is BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. And this is hoping to close the availability or build the actual infrastructure that brings broadband to our homes. Texas was allocated $3.3 billion. And by far, this is the largest in the country. California was with $1.9 billion, and Missouri was at $1.7. Of course, getting this amount of funding is really exciting, but it's also reflective of just how much work we have to do here. The other program that was funded through the IIJ is the Digital Equity Act grant programs, and this is to help close the digital opportunity gap. We were actually just allocated $55.6 million, and we hope that we'll eventually get that up to 93, but we haven't heard the final numbers on that yet. So in order to do all of this work, there are a number of requirements we had to submit to NTIA, and a lot of those were actually through, we wanted to make sure that we were always talking in conjunction with our partners. So we created a public engagement model. So I also just want to call this out here too, because as a new office, we really had to do a lot of work to reach out to other state agencies and organizations that had trusted partnerships. And so this was kind of a blessing and a curse, I think. It was a curse because we were already behind the curve and we had deadlines to really make and meet. But it was a blessing because I think we really found a lot of other organizations that were excited and willing to reach out to us. And it was a good reason for us to have to reach out. So at the top, you'll see that we had our Broadband Board of Advisors and the Governor's Broadband Development Council, but we also had 3 other types of engagement models as well. So we made sure that we were working with our statewide working group that consisted of representation from all covered populations, and it gave us a high-level view of broadband needs in Texas. The second was our 6 outcome-specific task forces that were aligned with kind of industry needs. And the third was our 12 regional working groups based on the Comptroller's 12 economic regions. And these served as our boots on the ground who had in-depth knowledge of the challenges being faced within their communities. So we didn't want to just stay in our office. So we went out onto the road and went to 24 cities across 24 towns and cities across Texas with almost 1,300 participants attending these meetings. But it was also really important for us to get a better data as well. So all the data that we heard from those participants at those meetings was all captured, but we also surveyed them. So we did 3 different surveys, a public survey for residents, another survey for industry for our ISPs to help understand their needs, and then a final survey for organizations. And this was to help us really understand what resources were already available at the local, national, local and state level in terms of digital opportunity and broadband access. Okay, and then I'll just briefly discuss the BEAD program, which is something I alluded to earlier. So BEAD has some similar requirements as BOOT. Skip ahead with this one. Yep, BEAD has similar requirements as BOOT with the 100 over 20. You'll notice that from the federal government, this agency said that 100 over 20 was the requirement. So you already see sort of 2 different approaches to requirements there, but it also has a universal low-cost option. we had 2 different types of requirements to submit for, or 3 different documents that we needed to submit to the NTIA, which details our whole process and plan. So if you want to do some, text mining, you can look at those and kind of figure out how we're going to deliver that. Again, all 50 states and the territories had to submit these documents in order to receive that funding and help close the digital divide. Finally, the last one, is to pause from talking with some of the IIJA, is to talk about the Broadband Infrastructure Fund. This is an additional pot of money that has state funds that we'll be using to help close the digital divide. Basically, it is a program to ensure that we have state funds to leverage any federal funding that's coming to us. And we're also using it to augment the 911 fund as well. All right. Finally, I'm going to pass it over to Lauren to talk about the Digital Opportunity Plan.
Awesome. Thank you. Testing. All right, sweet. Hi. Yes, I would. Thank you. All right, I'm Lauren Weber. I'm the Digital Opportunity Outreach Coordinator. So we're going to go back to IIJA funding and talk about digital opportunity. So the basis of all things digital opportunity here in Texas is the Digital Opportunity Plan, also known as the TDOP. That is an 800-page document, and it is our roadmap for what our plans are to close the digital divide in Texas for everyone. So that was just accepted on March 28th. So it's only been 2 months where we have this final draft from NTIA. Oops, did it backwards. Okay, so how we will pay for our plan is through the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program. As Cindy said, we have $55.6 million allocated to us. And we expect that the NTIA is going to accept applications by the end of August. So while we have our roadmap with TDOP, we still are in the early stages of really fleshing out exactly what our programs are going to look like. But what is in the TDOP are some very specific things. We have 5 measurable objectives that we are working towards. So this is what we are going to do. We're going to work on broadband availability and affordability, device availability, affordability, and technical support, digital literacy, online privacy and cybersecurity, and online accessibility and inclusivity of public resources. So these are kind of the tenets of digital opportunity. And so not only do we have some things that we're focusing on, we also have people that we're focusing on. So we've identified different covered populations who are most greatly impacted by the digital divide. These include racial or ethnic minorities, individuals in households below the 150% poverty line or low-income households, rural residents, aging individuals, individuals with disabilities, individuals with limited English proficiency, veterans, and incarcerated individuals. You'll notice that at 58%, racial or ethnic minorities is our largest covered population here in Texas, and at 27% is individuals with limited English proficiency. We have 4 strategies of how we are going to accomplish our goals. Strategy number 1 is to think big. We're going to partner with and fund statewide institutions. Then we're going to get a little smaller and fund local partners. We want to promote internet adoption and maintain a living digital opportunity plan. And so the way that we are, one of the ways that we are planning to keep things fresh is with this new website we've just launched called, we're calling it the Texas Digital Opportunity Hub. It is located at digitalopportunityfortexas.com. I'll say that again, digitalopportunityfortexas.com. And there's some really cool things on here, so I'm going to walk you through some of what you can find on our website. So first, we've got the home page, and that's just kind of telling the story of what's going on in the digital opportunity landscape here in Texas. And we have the plan section. This is an interactive version of that 800-page document. So here you're going to be able to learn about our goals, learn about our strategies, some of what Cindy said with the surveys and our public outreach. Some of that information is on here as well. So just kind of a way to really get a better grip of what's going on in Texas. And then, the big one for you guys, our data center here is awesome. We have, let me read exactly what we have for our data center. It's pretty cool. We have some really interesting interactive dashboards that help the data come to life a bit. This data can be viewed through the lenses of specific geographies and covered populations, and very importantly, all of our data is downloadable. We really view this as an important resource for our potential sub-grantees. We want to make sure that they are coming to the hub and using this information to support their grant applications. As Cindy said, this is a very large and historic amount of money that's coming to do this work, probably once in a lifetime, so we really want to make sure that we're maximizing our grant funds with people who are, wanted to say that right, so we're maximizing this opportunity and funding data-driven programs that really work to achieve the goals that we've set. So we'll look at a little bit of the data that is on our website here. So I wanted to show you, you'll see a chart here with showing some population intersection. We recognize that many Texans identify with multiple covered populations, and we can use this data to help reach out to organizations that are trusted and partner with those populations. Here is the same type of data that from before, but shown in a different way. So we've got lots of different options. Here's an example of a geographical focus on internet adoption. The darker blue is the darker the blue, the more internet subscribers. This helps us zoom in on areas that need the most support. For example, you can select a specific county from the drop-down menu on the left and see if that's an area that needs assistance. And here's an example of devices that Texans use to access the internet. The blue bar represents all of Texas, but you can compare by counties, which are pictured in red. Here you'll notice that the similarities on the device usage are strong throughout the entire state. This data also tells us that smartphones are the most commonly used device to access the internet, and while accessing the internet through cell phones is often the least expensive and most convenient choice, we do know that there are limitations to only having a cell phone as your only way to access the internet. And the limitations include screen size, small screen size, and data caps. All right, and then the last section of the hub is the resources section. What we're really working to do here is plan our programs with sustainability in mind. What we've heard from our stakeholders time and time again is that the best way to achieve sustainability is through partnerships. And so as a state agency, we kind of view ourselves as an aggregator of bringing together people who are doing this digital opportunity work. And so we have this Texas asset inventory. So if you are a local government or a nonprofit and you're looking to see who else you can partner with, who else is doing this type of work, you can come to our website and find that information. All right, and so that's kind of where we're at in the digital opportunity space and infrastructure space here, broadband space. If you have any questions, please stay in touch with us. We host two roundtables monthly, a local government roundtable and a virtual industry roundtable. We also have a monthly newsletter. And if you have any questions, we'll answer them now, but you can also email broadband@cpa.texas.gov. All right, so we'll take some questions. Anybody? Yay. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for this wonderful presentation, you two. This is great. This is great in what you're doing. Now, one question that I have, maybe two. So you are pretty much promoting and advocating broadband access, extending it. As far as you know, does the state has something like a mini FCC? Okay, because this is great, but I tell you something from the perspective of a broadband consumer, there is a lot of false, advertising, misrepresentation of capacity by companies that provide services, and it's sad if, for example, public monies are used to invest in infrastructure that, at the end of the day, is really made sometimes on purpose not to deliver on the promises. Is there any way to sort of like spot check every now and then to make sure that whatever was constructed, in terms of expansion, is living up to expectations, so that certain companies, don't come back into the business if, you were to be able to continue doing this, because it is the experience. I think the only provider that seems to be reliable in delivering on the promise, and I'll say the name, Google. Everybody else is shaky, and flaky. And it's sad because, there is this representation that you show the county maps where all these services are available, but a lot of the time is, let's say, insufficient, or services that really fall short, way short of expectations. And it would be a shame if, public money, supports that type of, shabby, kind of thing. So any comments on that?
Okay. Thank you for that comment. That is really mirrors a lot of actually what we heard out in the field when we did those the stakeholder engagements. And it's really challenging to be able to have to be tasked with implementing infrastructure. But at the end of the day, the broadband office, we aren't a regulator. The importance of what we do is going to be through our funding programs and the follow-up monitoring that happens after those funds are awarded for those those programs, the BEAD and the CPF, the ARPA project, which is our BOOT project. So in terms of making sure that the funding is getting used to build infrastructure because we're giving money out and people say that they're going to build, are they going to build? That's what the monitoring is for, and that's what we are required to do and what we will do. In terms of the data quality, that is unfortunately housed, well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, it's just that we can't help access it in that specific way. But the FCC is really the folks that do, they're the ones that receive any challenges to what residents are getting. So if you have, if you're saying that, hey, I'm subscribing to this service, they say I should be getting this, and I'm not getting this, there's actually a whole challenge process that you can go through to submit that. And it is really the first time that the FCC is doing work like this, and we're really happy that they are. I think most people are. And like any other government process, it does take time and feedback and iteration to get it right. So that would be the first place I would say, to participate in that process, because I think that's the only way that we are going to get correct data. And the last thing I'll say is that the more access we have to data, the more participation we get in the process, the better that we'll all know what is available. So as BEAD comes out, please do stay tuned with some of the pieces of that program. Will also be a challenge process. And local governments and people that are registered that have a particular license will be able to submit challenges to whether or not a specific provider is eligible for funding based on the services that they provide. But I appreciate you asking it, because just come right out and say it, because I think that's how a lot of people feel. And I appreciate that, it's a challenging, it's a big project, right? It's a lot of money.
This is the other question of, okay, so we don't have a public option anyway for those things, but there are players out there that are not delivering on promises that people are paying for. And in this case, the FCC, they're waking up to it, hopefully, because a lot of money is spent, on accessing resources that are not living up to expectations across the nation, not only in Texas, but thank you.
Another question? Yes. Now you're going to get the tough question.
Thank you for a great presentation and the work you're doing, because without question, it's really going to help Texas advance our quality of life and access to information, better government, better development, and so on. So the work you're doing is vital. I think as you were presenting and kind of looking at the different demographic groups where you kind of see as, where there's a real dearth of access, what are you all doing in terms of both being proactive in terms of advancing in each of those groups and then potentially monitoring progress in terms of penetration in those groups?
So in terms of, and let me just make sure I'm understanding the question correctly. So the demographic information is we're sort of referring to the covered populations. So the covered populations comes from actually American Community Survey data. And so we rely on that data to help us really understand what the kind of aggregated, the estimated focus of those populations in Texas. Our digital opportunity survey that we released last summer was one way of trying to, I don't know if I'm using this word correctly, but triangulate, or like at least base off, really understand if what is those estimates that are coming out from the census are true to what we're seeing in those counties. And as I sit here answering the question from the state demographer, I'm thinking we probably should have reached out to you guys sooner. But I think that's one of the struggles, and I did bring this up to someone yesterday, someone from the Population Reference Center, I think, was that when we get those rural areas where there isn't a lot of participation in surveying, but there's also confidentiality that needs to be protected, it's harder to get this granular data. And so I think when we are considering, so we have the reporting that we have to do back to the National Telecommunications Information Administration from how we've been able to meet the goals for those covered populations. My hope, as we were hiring for a digital opportunity data coordinator, my hope is that working with the current data sources and receiving some of the reporting from those programs will help us get a better understanding of who's in those regions that are most affected. Additionally, your second question was about how we're going to monitor progress. We have to monitor, this is a 5-year program, and so we will be relying a lot on those, the reporting from our subgrantees on how that's going. But I think I was also brainstorming with a few people yesterday about what does a Texas survey look like, around these specific covered populations? How can we work collaboratively to share data to help us better understand the needs of these communities? Can we leverage, AgriLife Extension offices or workforce centers, really just to better understand what the needs are, and doing it in a way that's really thoughtful around over surveying and making sure that we're collecting data that's actually relevant and that being transparent about it. So I don't know if I actually answered your question, Dr. Potter. Okay, thanks.
Comments? I'm getting more than 10,000 steps daily now.
Thank you for the presentation. So where I live, there are places that don't have electricity but have water, and vice versa. So the question would be, are you collaborating with our institutions to make sure that where we'll have broadband, we'll have also water and other utilities that are needed? Yeah, with other institutions to make sure that where these companies or institutions that will be offering this broadband will also have water and other utilities.
That we can deliver on. I don't want to accept responsibility for anything more than we can't deliver on, but I think that's also the part, it's an important point, and I think that the part of the whole point of collecting this data and being transparent about it and making sure it's accurate is, and then communicating out that it exists, is so that we can point to this and say, hey, these areas they're lacking in broadband and they're also lacking in water or other infrastructure. I know there was just a previous conversation about other infrastructure needs, data around other infrastructure needs. And so a part of our office's mission is to make sure that there's accurate data so that we're able to share that. And we do consistently meet with other state agencies like TxDOT and other agencies to make sure that they're aware of this as well. The Texas Water Development Board as well.
All this grant money, are the recipients in your mind will be like existing, like AT&T and cable companies, or T-Mobile or wireless, or are you focused on hardwire landlines or wireless, or just any kind of communication where you can extend broadband access to everyone?
It's a great question. So for both of the projects, there is a fiber preference, which means that for both BEAD and CPF, the preference is to install fiber technology to make it essentially future-proof so that you are also always going to be getting those higher speeds. The downside is that some of the parts of Texas are, it's very difficult to install fiber, and it's very expensive to install fiber. And because the goal of the BEAD program is to provide universal access, we might look at other types of technology just to ensure that places that do not have access can get some kind of reliable internet access. With reference to your first question, we are developing a scoring rubric for the grant program, and it will have a specific number of questions and points that different subgrantees that different applicants can be awarded based on past experience, but also based on some other qualifications that may help us to ensure that there is that no one provider is being privileged, I would say. We're trying to make it as fair and equitable as possible. If you want to run through I think it's volume 2 that does provide our scoring rubric, I believe in there, but it's something that we've heard, that's a question that we've been hearing a lot. The idea is to promote cost effectiveness, right, as well as competition. And so I think that's part of those are the goals of the BEAD program.
To dovetail on his question, is there any requirement under these programs that the providers that do receive the funding, obviously with the sunset of the Affordable Connectivity Program, has there been any thought given to making sure those providers are giving service that is at a cost that the consumer in those areas that are historically underserved can afford? I think the gentleman was saying that some of these areas don't have water, some of these areas don't have electricity. So if a family is going to make a decision about what they're going to subscribe to, broadband may not be, or food or medicine, broadband may not be at the top of their list. So just because you bring it doesn't mean that those historically underserved.
So that's an incredibly important point. That is one of the goals of the digital opportunity, is to consider affordability. But for BEAD and for CPF, there is and so that is going to be that element of what people are going to be able to choose from in terms of service and cost. In terms of what the Broadband Office can folks know through our data as well, what we've ran, what we've talked about, what the potential low-cost option should look like, what it should cost. Again, that is informed feedback, but lots of stakeholders have lots of feedback, and we know that in terms of the ACP, Texas was one of the, and so I actually just looking at the data the other day, I think the allocation for our digital opportunity programs was 55.6, and I believe a 1-month cost for ACP for Texans was $51 million. So it was an extraordinarily important subsidy for funds, and thinking about affordability goes hand in hand with the success of any kind of broadband infrastructure program.
Just a quick clarification. I know you said like your data is coming from ACS. So do you get the actual data from the providers to overlay over it to see the digital divide that's happening? Or like you're just relying on ACS data exclusively? And the survey you guys are doing, I know you're doing a survey on yourself, but undercount is a big thing. Like the survey respondent rate is very low. Even when you look at certain rural areas, even for census is very low. I'm pretty sure the same thing you must have noticed. So do you guys get data from the providers themselves directly to see which households are already getting it and then the gap from there?
Digital opportunity data, we are getting that from the ACS data, but in terms of in terms of broadband subscriptions, that's coming from the FCC. So yeah, that's all FCC data, as well as I believe for the Texas, yeah, everything is shifted to receiving our data from the FCC, and that's where internet service providers are supposed to report. Correct. Thank you for that clarification.
Are there any efforts to, are there any efforts to map specifically where there are buried lines for internet so people can see if it's in their area or not? Because there might be instances where your neighbor maybe has internet, but you don't, and you don't know whether you're eligible to receive it, right? I feel like it would address the issue of the last mile.
Can you repeat the question? Did you hear that? Yes. Okay.
I think so. So I believe the question was, are there efforts to map where internet is available so that people can see whether or not someone next to them is subscribing to the internet? Or are you talking about like to be planned, internet to be planned, where it currently exists? No, that's what the FCC broadband map is. So if you go online to National Broadband Map, you can put in your address and you can see there's like a bunch of different layers, but you can basically see by technology type that are called unserved, underserved, and served, or underserved and unserved and underserved, right? And so those are two areas that you can use. There's also a broadband funding map, which I also find really interesting because it lets you know what areas might be eligible for specific funding, pots of funding providers might go, might be going for in order to build in those specific areas. I would also really encourage folks to talk to your Council of Governments too, because they are really well situated to be in a position of knowing what's happening in terms of infrastructure build out and data collection. So I think those are great people to kind of help, you know, what's coming. They might already be having some discussions or know what's happening on the ground.
We do have some folks from councils of government. If you all can raise your hand, I know Mr. Hunt and back here, Jenny Lewis Ford. Yeah, so we very critical partners, I'm sure, in a lot of the work that you all are doing. Do you have any other questions back here? Just wanted to make one comment too, really quick. I do, in case, you know, this is something that I know I've learned, right? Certainly coming into what happened during the 2020 census. During the 2020 census, it was the very first time that the census actually allowed people to respond to the census via online. Before, it's always been mail out through, you know, addresses and all of that. So it was the first time they did that, and they're going to continue to do that certainly in 2030. So all the more reason, right, when we think about that, and the hope is that, you know, that the Census Bureau will not like, you know, we'll still do both, right? Do mail outs for 2030 and all, but I know they're starting to shift to be more reliance on getting connected via the internet and to respond to that. So when we think of these populations around our state, the need is very great. So I don't know if you all you heard any of that in your outreach with organizations or in your town halls at all.
Census. Yeah. I think in general, you know, there were a lot of the same people that are advocates for broadband infrastructure are also advocates to bring people into the participatory process. And so I think that is very, very aligned with ensuring that people have access to have their voice counted. So, yeah. Making it easy. Was are there considerations for whether or not the funding will be used to connect one or many people, or controls in place? And there is one in place. I believe it's called the cost per pass. Essentially helps us understand how much per proposed project is it will cost to connect the certain number of homes that are within that project. And that will probably differ based on type of technology. Certainly the geography factors into that a lot. I'm so glad that we're going to have engineers on staff to help us think through all of this. But that is, yeah, those are some of the finer details of the program design that really go into awarding funds to ensure that they are the funding is going to the people that the greater public good.
Questions? No? Well, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. We have time for one more question.
Sorry, I don't know if this is, I don't follow this issue like too closely, but I know in other states, like municipalities are allowed to have their own broadband. So similar to the previous question of like, you can't convince AT&T or Charter to go out to your area. Can like a county apply for funds and become their own broadband provider?
Out to some people in the audience that might know that question. I can't remember the state statute on this. Does anyone? Lonnie, can you answer that one?
Yes, local governments can apply now, and other entities. They have to get the Tier D license in order to be able to apply for funding. There's a Tier E license, which is designed to allow local governments access to the data to file map challenges in the state map challenge process. But if they just get the Tier E license, they won't be eligible to apply for funding. Tier D lets you do both. So my encouragement would be, if you're getting a license to be able to view the data, go ahead and get the Tier D, keeps your options open. That said, in reality, the rules of the program, I think everyone will agree, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, because we have what we have right now because of our existing commercial ISPs. Unfortunately, it's just not to their advantage to cover everyone with that, where they're not profitable. But I believe the rules of the grant program are going to strongly favor existing commercial ISPs. So a lot of local governments may look at it and decide, while we're eligible to apply, we're not in a very competitive situation and probably won't apply. But yes, they could apply. For that reason, I'll just throw this in, I'll hand the mic back. I'm encouraging the BDO to hold back some of that money, to let the dust settle after the bulk of it is awarded, just to see where the remaining gaps are, so that there will be some additional funding to come back strategically and try to fill in some of those gaps. Because I think everyone agrees, even though $3.3 billion is a lot of money, it's not going to get every single location in Texas covered.
This is Jenny Lewis Forward with Texas Association of Regional Councils. So
Thanks. If I could supplement what Lonnie's going to say, the rules are strongly in favor, in fact, of the for-profit providers. By design, obviously, it's the for-profit providers that got all this money passed in Congress, right? So they want to see the benefit. The problem with your rural community standing up a broadband operation, or a community, is one, they're not going to be as eligible for these funds, but then how do they maintain the cost of the service? It would be through your property taxes, which we all don't love to pay, especially in counties. The other thing would, and there's a cap to your property taxes as well. So it's not profitable for the for-profit. How is the government going to long-term supplement what they use that funding to put in the ground? Because there's going to be maintenance expenses that come along long-term, and then it has to be either passed through to the ratepayer or paid for from another source. So I think that's going to be an issue. The other thing for cities, that they're going to have to take into consideration is the passage of a bill last session, House Bill 2127, which does not allow cities to do things that the legislature does not authorize them to do. So I think there will be tension between whether or not a city is actually allowed to provide this service that isn't regulated as a utility. So there'll be some tension. I'm assuming probably long-term legal battles about what is or isn't, because that bill, again, just passed. So I think you'll see a reluctance from a lot of your communities to jump in head first and provide the service where the, unfortunately, where the ISPs are not. That's my personal opinion, not the opinion of the Texas State Data Center or the Broadband Development Office.
Thank you for doing that. So, right. Well, I think that'll conclude our presentation. I want to give our presenters a round of applause. It's a lot to build an office from scratch. So, appreciate the efforts of the Broadband Development Office for their sincere work to really do outreach and take on this monumental task. I think it's going to take everyone collectively, but I think we felt it was very important, along with the theme of our conference of bridging gaps, building bridges, is to really highlight this issue, give you all an update, know where to go to get more information, and continue to advocate at the local level for this very needed service. So thank you all for joining us, and we're going to check out, thank you those who joined online, and we're going to transition into our next in-person workshop sessions. Thank you.